The key was heavier than it looked. Clara held it in her palm for a long moment before she stepped out of the county social worker's office, Maya pressed against her hip. Small fingers wrapped around the belt loop of Clara's jeans the way a child holds on when she senses something is shifting but doesn't yet have words for it. The key was old brass, the kind that looks like it was made to open something that mattered. It had a small paper tag tied to it with a piece of white string, and on the tag, in handwriting Clara had not seen in 3 years, were the words, "For when you need it most." Clara did not know what that meant yet. She was 34 years old and she had been sleeping in her car for 11 days. Before that, she had been in her sister's spare room, which had stopped being comfortable before it stopped being available. Before that, she had been in an apartment she could no longer afford after the restaurant closed and the shift stopped and the savings, what little there had been, ran out slowly, then all at once. Maya was 6. Maya still believed that sleeping in the car was a kind of adventure, the way children will believe almost anything if their mother says it calmly enough. The social worker had told Clara that her grandmother, Dottie Mae Hollins, had passed away 2 weeks ago. She had not told Clara directly, because there was no phone to reach her on, no address to send a letter to. But Dottie Mae had known. She had left instructions. She had left the church. The town of Harlan's Creek was for hours south of where Clara had been living, or trying to live, which meant it was for hours away from everything she had failed at. She drove with the windows cracked because the heat was gentle for October, and Maya slept in the backseat with her shoes off and her mouth slightly open, and Clara let herself feel. For the length of those 4 hours, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope exactly. Something quieter than hope. She had not been back to Harlan's Creek since the summer Maya was 3. Before that, she had been back every Christmas, every other Easter, sometimes just randomly. Driving down on a Thursday because Dottie Mae had called and said she was making butter beans and there was no real reason not to come. Those were different years. Before the divorce, before the restaurant job, before the long cascade of choices and circumstances that she had never quite managed to get ahead of. Dottie Mae had been 81. She had been the kind of woman who wore house slippers to their mailbox and kept a notepad by the phone even after nobody used the phone anymore. She had raised Clara's mother and Clara's aunts in a 3-bedroom house on Canfield Street. And she had kept going to the Church of the Risen Word on Millbrook Road every Sunday long after the congregation had dwindled to almost nothing. And then after the congregation had stopped coming altogether. Clara had asked her once, maybe 5 years ago, why she still went when there was no one there. "I go for the quiet," Dottie Mae had said. "And for the habit. And because someone has to keep the lights on, even when there's no one home." Clara had thought that was just something old women said. She pulled into Harlan's Creek just after 2 in the afternoon. The town was smaller than she remembered it, or maybe she was just looking at it differently now, the way you look at things when you're arriving with nothing. The hardware store was still there. The pharmacy had become a vape shop. The diner on the corner of Main and Thurston had a new sign but the same booths she remembered, orange vinyl, the kind that sticks to your legs in summer. She parked in front of Dottie Mae's old house first, before going to the church. She didn't go in. She just sat and looked at it through the windshield. It had already been sold, the social worker had told her, decades ago remortgaged and the proceeds used for things Clara didn't know the details of. There was a wreath on the door that someone else had put there. There were wind chimes on the porch that weren't Dottie Mae's. Maya woke up and looked at the house and said, "Is that where Grandma Dot lived?" "Yes," Clara said. "It looked small." "It held a lot," Clara said. She put the car back in drive and turned toward Millbrook Road, the brass key still sitting in the cup holder between them, catching what light came through the window. Maya reached over and picked it up and examined it the way children examine things they find interesting, turning it slowly, holding it up. "What does it open?" she asked. "Something Grandma Dot left for us," Clara said. "Is it treasure?" Clara almost said no. But something stopped her. "Maybe," she said instead. "We'll see." The Church of the Risen Word had not been an active congregation in 7 years. Clara knew this in the abstract, the way you know things about a place you're from but haven't been paying attention to. What she was not prepared for was how it looked standing in front of it on a Tuesday afternoon with the October light coming sideways through the old oaks along Millbrook Road. It was not a grand building. It had never been grand. It was a white clapboard structure with a modest steeple that had lost its weather vane at some point, and the paint was peeling along the south-facing wall in long strips. And the sign out front still read Church of the Risen Word, Sunday service 10 a.m. in faded black letters that no one had changed. But the grounds were clean. That was the first thing Clara noticed. The grass had been cut recently, or recently enough. The front steps had been swept. Someone had placed a small clay pot of yellow marigolds beside the door, and they were not dead. She unlocked the door with the brass key. It turned smoothly, the way locks turn when they are maintained. Inside, the air was cool and held that particular smell of old wood and candle wax and something she couldn't name. Something that lived in places where many people have been quiet in the same room over many years. The pews were still there. 8 rows on each side, simple oak, worn smooth on the seat edges. The pulpit stood at the front. The stained glass window above it showed a scene in blues and ambers, a figure with hands open. Though the glass had a long diagonal crack through the lower right corner that someone had repaired with clear adhesive. It held. Meyer walked slowly down the center aisle the way children walk in spaces that feel like they require a certain behavior, lightly, carefully. Looking up at the ceiling where a single wooden crossbeam ran the length of the nave. "It smells like old," Meyer said. "It smells like old," Clara agreed. She stood in the center of the space and breathed. She had not been inside a church in years, and this church specifically she had not entered since she was maybe 19. When she had come for a cousin's wedding and sat in the second pew from the back and felt the specific restlessness of a young person who believes she is already beyond the places she grew up in. She was not beyond them. She had simply been away. She walked through the building slowly, room by room. There was a small office behind the pulpit with a metal desk and a filing cabinet and a window that looked out on the side yard. There was a fellowship hall attached to the back, rectangular, with folding tables stacked against one wall and a kitchen that had an industrial sink and an old refrigerator that hummed when she plugged it back in. There was a bathroom. There was a closet full of hymnals. There was, Clara realized slowly, everything a person needed to not be in a car. It was not comfortable. It was not what anyone would choose. But it was dry and it had running water and it had walls and a roof and it was hers, at least in whatever way the Lord had decided it was hers. She sat down in one of the pews, the third from the front on the left side, she didn't know why, and for the first time in 11 days she let herself be still. Meyer sat beside her and leaned against her arm. "Are we going to stay here?" Meyer asked. "For a while," Clara said. "Like camping?" "A little like camping." "Okay," Meyer said, which was the particular grace of 6-year-olds. That they can accept the strangeness of things if someone they trust says okay without flinching. Clara looked up at the cracked stained glass. The light through it fell in colored pieces on the pew in front of her. Blue. Amber. A thin strip of rose at the edge. She thought about her grandmother walking in here alone, every Sunday, for years. She thought, for the quiet. She thought, for the habit. She thought, because someone has to keep the lights on. She did not find the box immediately. The first week was about survival in the practical sense, getting Meyer enrolled in the elementary school 2 blocks from Millbrook Road. Finding the food bank on Clement Street that the social worker in the county office had mentioned, learning which burners on the old church kitchen stove worked and which ones didn't. Figuring out that the water heater needed 20 minutes to recover between uses. She also cleaned. She cleaned the way people clean when they are trying to make a claim on a space, trying to say this is mine now, I am here. She mopped the fellowship hall floor and wiped down the kitchen and swept the sanctuary and polished the pews with an old can of wood oil she found under the kitchen sink. It was during this cleaning that she began to notice things. There were small repairs throughout the building that were recent. A patch on the roof over the office that still had the brightness of new shingles. A section of baseboard in the fellowship hall that had been replaced, though with a slightly different color from the rest. A window latch in the bathroom that had clearly been recently replaced, the screws still sharp and clean. Someone had been caring for this building. She asked around, carefully, the way you ask things in small towns when you're not sure what you're walking into. She asked at the diner, where she went twice a week when she had money for coffee. She asked at the hardware store, where she'd gone for a new mop head. Nobody knew anything definitive. There was a name that kept coming up, loosely, the way names come up in small towns, an older man named Ellisbar, who had been a deacon at the Church of the Risen Word before it closed. Who still lived on the other side of town on Perch Street. She filed this away. It was the second week when she found the box, and she found it not by looking but by the way you find things when you are paying attention to the wrong thing at the right moment. She had been on her hands and knees in the third pew from the front on the left side, the one she had sat in that first day, which had since become her pew. The place she sat in the evenings when Meyer was asleep in the office on the cot she'd borrowed from the food bank, scrubbing a dark stain from the floor beneath the kneeling rail. The floorboards there were old and uneven, and as she scrubbed she noticed that one board near the base of the pew frame was not flush with the others. It sat perhaps a quarter-inch higher, and along its edge there was the faint mark of something having been pried up and reset. She stopped scrubbing. She pressed her hand flat against the board. It had a slight give, just barely, like a breath held too long. She sat back on her heels and looked at it for a moment. Meyer was at school. The building was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the oaks and made the sound that oaks make in October, which is particular and papery and belongs to that month alone. Clara pressed the board again. Then she went to the kitchen and found a flathead screwdriver. The board came up cleanly, as if it had been designed to come up. Beneath it was a shallow space, maybe 8 inches deep, between the floor joists, and sitting in that space, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, was a metal box. The kind that might once have held important documents or letters, rectangular, dark green with a small brass clasp that was not locked. Clara lifted it out and sat with it in her lap in the pew. She noticed her hands were not shaking. She had expected them to shake. But they were steady, their way hands are steady sometimes when the moment is bigger than nervousness. She opened the clasp. Inside the box were several things, and she took them out one by one and set them on the pew beside her. First, a folded piece of paper, handwritten, the handwriting Dottie May's, which Clara recognized immediately, looping and careful. The kind of handwriting from an era when penmanship was taught as a form of respect. Second, a small envelope, sealed, with Clara's name on the front in the same hand. Third, a bankbook. Old, the kind that no one uses anymore, but Clara opened it and looked at it again because the numbers inside it were not small. Fourth, a photograph, black and white, showing a younger version of someone Clara almost didn't recognize, a woman in her 30s maybe, standing in front of this same building when it was newer. When the paint was bright and the weather vanes still stood. The woman was smiling the way people smile when they don't know they are being photographed. On the back of the photograph, in different handwriting, older, more angular, were the words, Dottie May, 1962. The work begins. Clara held the photograph for a long time. Then she unfolded the letter. It was dated 14 months ago, which meant Dottie May had written it more than a year before she died, and more than 2 years before Clara had lost her apartment, and before the restaurant closed. And before any of the specific disasters that had led to the car and the 11 days and the brass key and the social worker's office. Which meant Dottie May had not written it in response to Clara's situation. She had written it in anticipation of something she simply believed would come. The letter said, Clara, my love. You are reading this because you needed to, and that means the time was right. I have been keeping this church going for 31 years since the congregation left, not because I believed it would be a church again, but because I believed it would be something. I didn't know what. I only knew that the right person would come to it. I believe that person is you, though I may not be alive to see what you do with it, and that is all right. The bank book holds the money I have saved over the years from the small pension your grandfather left and the arrangement I had with the diocese to maintain the property. I did not spend it because I did not need it. I kept it because I did not know what it was for until I thought about you. The building is yours. The money is yours. What you do with them is yours. But I want to tell you one thing. I want to tell you about Ellis Barr. Clara found Ellis Barr on a Thursday morning. He lived in a small brick house on Perch Street with a front porch that had a glider on it and a bird feeder that the squirrels were winning against. He was 77, she learned, and he had worked for 40 years as a plumber before his knees decided he was done. And he had been a deacon at the Church of the Risen Word from 1981 until the congregation's last Sunday in 2017. He was sitting on the glider when she walked up. He watched her come up the porch steps with the expression of a man who has had a long time to practice patience. "You're Dottie May's granddaughter," he said. It was not a question. "Clara," she said. "I know," he said. "Sit down." She sat in the porch chair across from him. He was a large man, broad in the shoulders in the way that stays even when age takes other things, with hands that looked like they had fixed a great many things over a great many years. "I found the box," she said. He nodded slowly. "She told me you would. She mentioned you. In the letter. She mentioned what she wanted me to explain. She said you could tell me about the building. What's been done to it?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the bird feeder. A sparrow landed, looked at the squirrel guard, flew away. When the congregation left, he said, the diocese said they'd maintain the property. They didn't. Not really. They sent someone once a year to check the roof, and that was it. He paused. Dottie May couldn't let it go. That building was where she was married. Where she buried your grandfather. Where she baptized your mother and your aunts. She couldn't watch it fall apart. She was in her 70s when the congregation left, Clara said. 74, he said. She came to me and asked if I'd help her. She said she had some money and she needed someone who knew how to fix things. I told her I was retired. He almost smiled. She said she didn't care what I was, she cared what I could do. For the next 7 years, Ellis told her, he had come to the church once a month, sometimes more often, and fixed what needed fixing. The roof patch she'd noticed. The baseboard. The window latch. The plumbing under the fellowship hall kitchen that had been on the verge of failing. The furnace that had needed a new igniter 2 winters ago. He had done it for nothing beyond what Dottie May gave him for materials, which she had tracked carefully in a small notebook. Why? Clara asked. He looked at her steadily. Because she asked me to. And because she was right that someone would come. He paused. And because I had nothing better to do with my Saturdays. Clara sat with that for a moment. She thought about her grandmother, in her late 70s and then her 80s, making these arrangements. Planning for a future she would not see but believed in anyway. Not hoping, specifically, for Clara. Hoping for whoever needed it. Did she talk about me? Clara asked. She wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Sometimes, Ellis said. She worried about you. She didn't say why. She just said you carried a lot. He looked at her. She said you had her stubbornness. She meant it well. Clara looked at her hands. I didn't visit enough, she said. It came out smaller than she'd intended, which was how truths sometimes arrive. No, he said. You didn't. But she wasn't keeping that building for an apology. She was keeping it for use. He looked out at the street. There's a difference. She walked back to the church in the afternoon, the long way around through town. Past the diner and the hardware store and the school where Meyer was learning her times tables in a classroom with a cracked radiator and a teacher who sent home notes in envelopes with hand-drawn stars on them. She walked slowly enough that she arrived just as the afternoon light was going gold through the oaks along Millbrook Road. She stood outside and looked at the building for a long time. The white paint peeling on the south wall. The steeple without its weather vane. The clay pot of marigolds by the door, which she now watered every morning. She thought about what 7 years of once-a-month Saturdays looked like from the inside. Not the work itself, but the act of showing up. The choice, made repeatedly, to maintain something that wasn't yours, for someone who might never come. She thought about her grandmother walking in here alone for 31 years. She thought, because someone has to keep the lights on. She understood, now, what that meant. She did not open the church as a church. She was not sure about God, not in the way Dottie May had been sure, and she did not think it would be honest to make it something she didn't believe in. But she knew what she had needed when she arrived, and she knew what Highlands Creek had and didn't have. And she knew what the fellowship hall and the kitchen and the rows of folding tables were built for, even if it wasn't their original purpose. By November she had applied for a non-profit status with Ellis Barr's help, because he knew a lawyer in the county seat who did charitable work for reduced fees. She had opened the bank book. The amount inside was not a fortune, but it was enough to begin, and she had started meeting with people. The food bank on Clement Street was understaffed. The school principal had told her, gently, that there were other children in Meyer's class whose home situations were not straightforward. The woman at the laundromat on 3rd Street had mentioned, offhandedly, that she turned people away sometimes on Friday evenings when there was nowhere else open and they needed to wash the week's clothes before Monday. Clara listened to all of it. By December, the fellowship hall was a weekly meal on Thursday evenings. It was simple food, the kind she knew how to make from years of restaurant shifts, soups, pasta, things that stretched and fed a table of people without drama. Ellis came on the first Thursday and washed dishes without being asked. The woman from the laundromat, whose name was Sandra Pruitt, came on the second Thursday and brought her daughter, who was 7 and became Meyer's close friend with the immediate and uncomplicated certainty that 7-year-olds use for friendship. By February it was twice a week. By March there was a rotation of volunteers, most of them people who had known Dottie May, who had heard through the small-town circularity of such things that her granddaughter was doing something in the old church on Millbrook Road. Clara made a point of not calling it anything too formal. It was not a shelter. It was not a program. It was, if anyone asked, a gathering place. A place for the week's needs. One evening in April, she was locking up after a Thursday dinner when she noticed a woman sitting in the 3rd pew from the front on the left side, Clara's pew, with a small boy asleep against her shoulder. The woman had been at the dinner, had eaten quietly, had helped clear one table before sitting down with her son. She looked to be in her late 20s. She had a bag at her feet that had the particular bulge of a bag that contains everything its owner currently owns. Clara sat down beside her. She didn't say anything for a moment. The boy slept. The building was quiet in the way it was always quiet in the evenings, wood and candle wax and that unnameable thing. "We've been in our car," the woman said. Not as a request. Just as a fact, because sometimes people need to say the true thing before they can say anything else. "Okay," Clara said. And then, because she knew what it meant to be in a car and to have someone say something without flinching, "We have a cot in the office. It's not much." The woman looked at her sideways. "We? My daughter and I," Clara said. "We've been here since October. You can stay tonight. We'll figure out the rest." The woman nodded. The boy slept. The April wind came through the old oak beside the building and made that sound, not October's papery sound but something softer, new leaves, a beginning sound. Clara sat for a while in the quiet before she stood to make up the cot. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about what it means to maintain something for 30 years on the faith that it would eventually be useful. She thought about Ellis Barr driving over on Saturdays to patch a roof for a building whose purpose he didn't know yet. She thought about a bankbook that was kept not because there was a plan but because there was a belief. She thought about the box beneath the pew, sitting in the dark, in the quiet, for however long it had been there. Not lost. Not abandoned. Just waiting. Carefully placed by someone who understood that the right moment doesn't announce itself in advance. She thought about her grandmother's handwriting on the paper tag, "For when you need it most." She had thought that was about the key. She understood now that it wasn't. It was about everything. The building. The money. The repairs made in quiet Saturdays. The love kept in place and maintained and handed forward to a granddaughter who hadn't visited enough, who was carrying too much. Who had driven for hours on a Tuesday afternoon with a child and a brass key and almost no hope, and found, instead of an empty building, a full one. Full of everything that had been kept for her. Full of a life she could now keep for someone else. There is a particular kind of love that does not need an audience. It works in the background, in the small hours, on Saturdays when there is no one watching. It patches roofs and fixes window latches and keeps a bankbook growing slowly in a shallow box beneath a church pew, because it has decided that someone will come who needs it. It does not know the name of that person. It does not need to. This is what Clara understood, sitting in the April quiet of the third pew from the front on the left side, listening to a stranger's child breathe in his sleep. She understood that her grandmother had not left her a building. She had left her proof that love, if it is patient enough and quiet enough, can build something that outlasts the person doing the building. That the small, invisible choices, to show up, to maintain, to save, to wait, are not small at all. They are the architecture of everything. She understood something else, too. She had thought, in the worst of those 11 days in the car, that she had failed Meyer. That she had brought her daughter into a kind of hardship that a mother shouldn't bring her child into. But she saw now that what she had actually done was bring Meyer to the exact place she was meant to be. Not to be saved by it, but to become part of it. To eventually, in her own time, add her own layer to a building that has been kept going by generations of people who believed in it before they understood why. The marigolds by the door need watering every other day. Clara hasn't missed a single morning. And sometimes, in the early light before Meyer wakes, she stands in the center of the sanctuary and listens to the quiet and thinks, someone kept this for me before I knew I needed it. Which makes her wonder, every single time, who she might be keeping something for, right now, without knowing it yet. What we build in silence, we build for those who come after us. What we maintain without recognition, we maintain for love. And what we leave behind in a box beneath the pews, that is not what we couldn't take with us. That is everything we saved on purpose, for the person we trusted would one day know exactly what to do with it.